Hey y'all, it's Nat. I'm actually refilming this intro because this video has ended up a lot longer than I anticipated, and so it's gonna need to be more than one part. And also the intro itself just needed to be shorter. So this video is a little off-brand for me. Y'all know I'm mainly a sci-fi fantasy reader. I occasionally dabble in other genres when the mood strikes, but historical romance is most certainly not my wheelhouse. I will say, in anticipation of season 3 of Bridgerton, I definitely have been in the mood for Regency romance, and I've really been enjoying Diana Quincy's books. And she's a Palestinian author, by the way, so if you haven't given her books a read, I highly recommend checking those out. I've really been enjoying going through her backlist. I think my favorite so far is The Duke Gets Desperate. Sorry for the tangent, where was I? Oh, right. Polin season's coming, and this is my most anticipated season of Bridgerton. And when I get excited about something, I can get a little obsessive. I literally cannot think about anything else, and I've been trying so hard not to be annoying about it on Instagram, but I needed an outlet, and so this vlog is gonna be that outlet. It's gonna be a two-part outlet. However, before we get into the video, I feel like we need to set expectations because I was not always a huge fan of Bridgerton. And I do still have my criticisms. I hard DNF'd book 1. If you're familiar with the book or the show even, you know why. If you've somehow managed to miss this series' biggest criticism, there is a spousal essay scene in book 1 and in season 1 of the show as well. And because of that, I was not at all interested in continuing on with the series. Simone Ashley, however, was the entire reason I decided to give the show a second chance. I saw her in the To Doom clip ripping Antony to shreds, and I was like, fuck, now I gotta watch it. I read book 2 ahead of season 2, and I almost DNF'd that one as well, but I did finish it. I didn't hate book 3 as much as I hated books 1 and 2, but I still didn't love it. Book 4 is the one out of all of the books that I have read in this series that I've hated the least. And that is how season 3 became my most anticipated season of Bridgerton. Because I saw the potential for Polin given how they adapted Cantony's love story so well and Polin's trajectory in the show thus far. I also do think that this series is a very interesting case study and adaptation, and so I wanted to do a reread of this book from that lens ahead of season 3. And I've only ever annotated books that I really enjoyed, so I wanted to see what annotating a book I'm more critical of looks like for me. As you can see, it's very much, we got a lot of tabs going on here. So if anyone watching this video loves these books dearly and they can't stand to hear any criticism of it, this might not be the video for you. There are things that I like about this book. Again, this is the one I hate the least. So I'm not going to be constantly bashing the book, but it would be disingenuous of me not to talk about my criticisms and gripes with the book and the show even. Having said all that, I did also say that I needed an outlet for all of my excitement for season 3. So if you're interested in hearing what I did enjoy about this book and what I would like to see in season 3, and even a little cameo from my dog Pearl, although that might actually be in part 2. I don't know. Editing Nat, let us know. But if you want to see all that, stay tuned. Oh, also, back when the trailer came out, I tried to film a little reaction video for it. I don't know if any of the footage is usable. I had to watch it like 3 times to fully process what was even happening. It was so much, I was very overwhelmed. So I don't know if it's just 23 minutes of me being incoherent, but I could just use the initial reaction and then maybe do a trailer breakdown now that I've had more time to properly absorb it. This video is also longer than I wanted it to be though, so I don't know. We'll see how the final edit shakes out. Okay, without further ado, let's get into the vlog. Spoiler warning ahead for Romancing Mister Bridgerton, obviously. Probably also seasons 1 and 2 of Bridgerton. And if you've been trying to avoid any news about season 3, I mean, I've been listening to a fan-made Polin podcast. Shout out to the Barb podcast. I'll link their stuff down in the description for anybody who's interested. They also post their podcast episodes to YouTube with subtitles, by the way, which I obviously appreciate as somebody who is partially deaf. But yeah, they have been keeping me up to date on any and all crumbs and tidbits about season 3, and some of that might make its way into the vlog as well. So tread with caution. You have been warned. So first things first, let's talk about my annotating system that I will be using for this book. We'll start with page flags. I can't remember if I mentioned a point system for page flags in my evolution of my annotating system video. I haven't totally tried this system yet, so we'll see how it goes. But essentially, this dark blue is going to be +2. All of the annotations on that given page are positive feedback, essentially. And then this light, Bridgerton blue, is going to be +1. Mostly positive, but there's a little bit of negative stuff there. And then this dark green is going to be 0 for equally positive and negative stuff, roughly. So they cancel each other out, I guess. And then this light green is going to be another type of 0 for just neutral observations. They're not positive or negative. I didn't have a good option for a light yellow. There's this kind of orangey yellow, and then there's this kind of greenish yellow. So since green is Polin's color, I chose this one. And this is -1, so mostly negative stuff on that page, but a little bit of positive stuff there too. And then finally, this mustard yellow is -2. All the annotations on that page are negative things. So the benefit of this for me is obviously at a glance from the side of the book, I can see, my overall enjoyment of it, I guess. We'll see how that goes. Next, we'll talk about highlighters. So this light blue is for anything that the show has already changed about their love story that I like. And then yellow is going to be anything that the show has changed that I don't like. I don't anticipate using this color as much. That's why I gave it the yellow, because it's a pretty bright color and it's kind of hard to see. Green is for book elements that I want the show to keep. Purple is for book elements that I kind of have mixed feelings about. Pink is for book elements that I don't want in the show. And then green is for book elements that I can take it or leave it. It doesn't matter. If they change it, I'm fine. If they don't change it, I'm fine. Lastly, this kind of muted blue-green color is anything that the show has already kept from the book that I like. And if there's anything that the show has kept from the books that I don't like, no, there isn't, because I don't have any other highlighter colors that fit the color scheme that I am going for here. So yeah. Next, we'll talk about the fine liners. Light blue, anything to do with Colin's arc. Yellow, anything to do with Pen's arc. Green, anything to do with the development of their relationship. Pink is for Lady Whistledown shenanigans. This kind of maroon-ish color is for any Lady Danbury shenanigans. Purple is for anything to do with Eloise, either as an individual or her relationship to Colin and or Pen. And this kind of a darker blue than the one I have for Colin. This is for Bridgerton family dynamics. This teal color is for Featherington family dynamics. And then this dark green color I have for Polin motifs. So there are certain motifs that both the books and the show use a lot for Polin, and it's dreams, fantasies, light, shadows, mirrors, etc. So just anything that I want to underline. I don't know for sure if I'll keep up with this, but we're gonna try. Okay, so lastly we have these metallic pens, and these are gonna be for any song lyrics that pop into my head as I read the book. Gold will be Pen, blue will be Colin, green will be Polin, pink will be Lady Whistledown, purple will be just miscellaneous. I don't really anticipate using this color, but it's there if I need it. Okay, so that's the annotating system. So without further ado, let's read, annotate, and discuss Romancing Mister Bridgerton. Y'all, I am so behind schedule on this video. I was really hoping I'd be able to follow along with the What a Barb podcast read-along schedule. Unfortunately, between med changes, doctor's appointments, other stuff going on in my life, and the fact that it's taking me a lot longer to annotate this video than I anticipated, because I have way too much to say, it's just not working out in the way that I'd hoped. I haven't even been able to listen to any of the podcast episodes that are out about, the reread, because I don't want this video to accidentally just become their podcast episodes. So yeah, as you can see, I have tabbed up the prologue up to chapter 5. So I'm gonna go ahead and we're gonna, discuss these first 5 chapters, and then I'll finally be able to listen to at least the first podcast episode, and then if I have more thoughts after listening to that, I'll come back and add them later. As you can see, we've got a good amount of tabs. We've got a good mix of all of the colors. It's a little hard to tell because I cut them in half because I want to get as much use out of these page flags as I possibly can. So I do have some notes that I'm going to use because I hate editing, and I already know this vlog is going to be so long, and I want to make the editing process as easy as possible on me. So I have some notes to help me not stumble my way through these chapters. Let's go ahead and get started with the prologue. We actually start off on a pretty good note. The prologue basically covers like a flashback to how Colin and Pen met, and then the flashback to the whole I'm not going to marry Penelope Featherington scene. So the very first line is what prompted me to add the minty green highlighter color. It wasn't originally in the annotating system, but then I started reading and I was like, whoops. So yeah, this is an aspect of the book that I can take or leave. I'm not invested in one outcome over another. But we learn that Penelope Featherington fell in love with Colin 2 days before her 16th birthday. We obviously don't quite know the timeline of Pen's acquaintance with the Bridgertons in the show. And Luke and Nicola have both, talked a lot about how they're very aware of many of the iconic scenes from the books that mean a lot to the fans, and they've tried to cram as many of those into the show as possible. And the way that Colin and Pen meet is definitely one of those scenes. Bridgerton does love flashbacks. We've seen them both in seasons 1 and 2. They tend to serve as a way of adding extra context as to why these characters are getting in the way of their own happiness. So for season 1, we had, Simon's flashbacks to his tumultuous relationship with his father. In season 2, we have Anthony's flashback to the trauma of witnessing his father's death and then immediately having to take on the responsibilities as the Viscount at a pretty young age. So if we do get flashbacks this season, it'll be interesting to see if they somehow still follow that pattern of like showing us how these characters are getting in their own way. It feels a little bit, it would be interesting to see. I don't know what angle they would take with that, but it all remains to be seen. But the big questions are obviously, 1, do we get to see how they met? And 2, will they change the timeline in any way? Because Pen is 28 in the book, so she's known Colin for 12-ish years, give or take. She'll be about 19 or 20 in the show. So if they still meet when she's 16 years old, she'll only have known him for 3 or 4 years. And that feels off, especially factoring in Pen's friendship with Eloise and just her dynamic with the Bridgertons. It seems like, they've known each other for a really long time. So I don't know. So maybe we'll get flashbacks to like when they were really young and they first met, and then have another flashback to later when he gets to fall off the horse. I don't know. Or maybe like she's known Eloise longer than she's known Colin for some reason. Or maybe they'll just keep the scene as is in the book. I suppose it doesn't really matter that much, but it's something that I'm curious about. Luke has also said a bunch of times that he doesn't think that fans are going to be able to predict what happens episode to episode. So I'm not trying to predict what's going to happen in season 3, okay? I'm just rattling off ideas and talking about the things that I find interesting and what I would like to see. And I'm trying to give myself some like imaginary content to hold me over until May 16th. Back to the book. So one day they're out at the park or something, and the wind blows Pen's bonnet off of her head. Colin comes riding in on a horse. The bonnet flies in his face. He falls off the horse and into the mud. And Pen is just bracing herself for him to like yell at her because she hasn't been met with a whole lot of kindness from people in her family and from other members of the ton. And instead of yelling at her, Colin just laughs and says, well, that wasn't very well done of me, was it? And it's a really sweet moment. This is why I say we get off to a pretty good start with the prologue, because what's so sweet about this is that Pen doesn't just fall in love with Colin just because he's good looking. That's certainly part of it. But she falls in love with his kindness. Insta love is usually a really big romance pet peeve of mine, But what I think Julia Quinn has done really well here is establish why this means so much to Penn, and it also establishes the pedestal that she puts Colin on. This very much shapes how she sees Colin, just as somebody who has a real talent for putting people at ease. And Luke has also talked about like how he thinks, you know, Colin very much took on this role of being the person that lifts everyone's spirit in the aftermath of Edmund's passing. I don't know that that is directly addressed or referenced in the book, but it's something that I would really like to see shine through in season 3. I'm also hoping we get to see parallels between Colin and Penn's relationship and Violet and Edmund, because I believe Violet was also a wallflower in her day as well. And so I do think that, you know, each of the Bridgerton boys has a little bit of Edmund in them personality wise. I'm thinking of that scene in season 2 where Gregory asks Antony, am I like him at all? And Antony's like, well, he had my seriousness, but he shared your love of a prank. And I really feel like Edmund and Colin both have this talent of putting people at ease and helping wallflowers step into the light, as it were. Regardless of whether or not we get this flashback in the show, I do think the show is going to emphasize that, you know, Colin's kindness is why Penelope fell in love with him. And that's like the most important thing, is to capture the spirit of their relationship and their dynamic, right? And we get that from the Most Remarkable Shade of Blue clip, the first clip that we got from season 3. You know, somehow your eyes shine even brighter when they are kind. How sweet. The prologue also does introduce a through line throughout the book that I hate, and it's this emphasis on Penn's appearance and how she's not as beautiful as the other girls in the ton. And, you know, from what we know about season 3, I don't think this is gonna be as much of an issue. Like, they both have their respective glow-ups, and they think the change in aesthetic is gonna fix all of their problems, and it doesn't. And it turns out, actually, you know, it's all about growing into yourself, gaining confidence, and being able to express yourself authentically with other people. But yeah, I haven't looked through the B-roll footage yet. I don't even know if it's gonna go in this vlog, but if it does and you see me rolling my eyes or showing other signs of frustration, either Colin's being annoying or there's another degrading comment about Penelope's appearance, and I hate it. Something that's interesting about the book is that Penelope kind of just resigns herself to spinsterhood because she doesn't think it would be fair to marry someone else when she's in love with Colin. I like that she's not going to be doing that in the show. I like that she's not just waiting around for Colin forever, but I do think it might be interesting to see her wrestle with some guilt about pursuing Devling if she reaches a point in their relationship where she's like, he's really wonderful and I could be really content with this man, but I'll never feel the same way about him that I do about Colin. But also, I gotta get the fuck out of this house, and if Devling's the one to help me do that and not Colin, then I can still be happy. Okay, so the last thing we have to discuss about this prologue is the "and I am certainly not going to marry Penelope Featherington" scene. Whoops. Colin didn't mean for Penn to hear that. So obviously the way that this happens in the book is embarrassing and not great, but it's a lot easier to come back from than I would never dream of courting Penelope Featherington, not in your wildest fantasies. It is so funny to me how far they took it in the show. It's not funny, poor Penn, but it's kind of funny. Colin, my love, you make it difficult for me to defend you. So in the book, Penn obviously understands. She has a really sweet conversation with Antony. Actually, you know, she understands that Colin is not the type of person to be deliberately cruel towards someone. And, you know, she expects that their mom was just kind of getting on his case about getting married, and, you know, she somehow got caught in the crossfire of all that, which is exactly what happened. With the addition of Colin's brothers, you know, ribbing him about getting married and also making it about Penelope. And what I do love is that in both of these iterations of their love story, Penelope is always the one to encourage Colin's travels. Obviously, in season 1, Colin always had the intention to travel, but Pen is the one that reminds him of those ambitions. In the book, she tells Anthony, he should go away, travel. He's not ready to marry, and your mother won't be able to restrain herself from pressuring him. She means well. And that's how it all starts for him. And I really like that, in both versions of this, we establish that she really understands him and she champions him in his endeavors, which is really sweet. I love how Pen handles herself in the moment, though. In the book, Colin is made aware right away that Penelope overheard what he said, and she's like, I never asked you to marry me. I didn't tell anybody that I wanted you to propose to me, so, whatever. And I really love that moment. But I'm actually glad that in the show, Pen has the chance to, one, run away, cry, have all of her emotions about the absolute train wreck of a night she's had losing Eloise and Colin back to back. So I like that she's given the time to have her emotions about it and then collect herself and confront Colin on her own terms, which obviously we know culminates in the Goodnight Mr. Bridgerton theme, which chef's kiss, no, that's a great scene, and I can't wait to see the lead up to it. Oh, sorry y'all, I was wrong. We do have one more thing to talk about before we get into chapter 1. So, Lady Whistledown writes an issue after Colin's declaration, and she says, if Miss Featherington were to somehow manage to drag a Bridgerton brother to the altar, it would surely mean the end of the world as we know it, and this author, who freely admits she would not know heads from tails in such a world, would be forced to resign her post on the spot. Okay, this is something, I suppose the show could do a version of this. I don't think they will, and I don't think that they should. It doesn't make sense for the trajectory of the show to tie Polin Endgame to the retirement of Lady Whistledown, but we'll talk about that more, I think, when the Lady Whistledown shenanigans really amp up in the book a bit later. The prologue ends kind of acknowledging that Colin's almost never in town. When he was in town, which wasn't often, they seemed to settle into an easy, if not terribly deep, friendship. This is what I love about the show's take on Polin, is that they do kind of already have a deeper friendship than they do in the books. In show, Polin's friendship is certainly an unequal one. In similar ways, actually, to Penelope's friendship, I think. We'll talk about that more a little bit later. But Colin's friendship obviously means a lot to Pen, and we see by the end of season 2 that Pen's friendship actually means a lot to Colin as well, even if he does take it for granted. It feels like Polin in season 2 is 10 steps ahead of Polin at the beginning of this book. And the friendship that they build in the book isn't nearly as deep by the time that he proposes to her as it is by episode 7 of season 2. Okay, I want to say more, but I feel like I can say them in future chapters. Let's move on to chapter 1 because we've been here for a while. Okay, so chapter 1 basically just deals with Colin's return from Greece, or Cyprus. Lady Whistledown does not have her facts straight on that one. But we start with Lady Featherington trying to relay the news to Pen, who of course already knows, and she thinks that Colin and Pen's younger sister Felicity, who's around Hyacinth's age, would make a great match, even though Felicity is in love with someone else and is certain to be engaged to him soon. A lot of people wonder why Felicity isn't in the show, and I think there's many reasons. One, they probably wanted Pen to feel more isolated in the family dynamic with the Featheringtons, and her and Felicity are quite close in the book. That certainly raises the stakes for Pen in the upcoming season. She has a real drive to get out of that household, whereas if Felicity were there, she might want to stay to support her. Again, Felicity is supposed to be Hyacinth's age, and we're seeing in the show right now the younger Bridgerton siblings don't have major plot lines. They're just there for a lot of the familial moments, and the show is about the Bridgertons, not the Featheringtons, so they probably didn't need to have a young Featherington sibling. Also for logistics reasons, young actors have to have schooling, they can't work as many hours as adult actors. Hyacinth and Gregory are important because they're Bridgertons, and eventually they are going to take center stage but Felicity wouldn't. She's just Hyacinth's best friend, right? And Hyacinth can have a best friend figure be introduced later in the show, closer to her season or just in her season. Moreover, even with the side characters in the show, they try to give them like complete mini character arcs, you know? We get Philippa is with her cheese man, and we're getting Prudank in season 3. I'm so excited for Prudank. And then I think once Pen becomes a Bridgerton, we're not going to be seeing the Featheringtons as much anymore, if at all. There is the bit about the first of the daughters to have a son, you know, that son will inherit the Featherington estate. So I don't necessarily think that we'll never see the Featheringtons again after season 3, but if we do, we'll likely only see them in passing. And so if Felicity is Hyacinth's age, why introduce her for her to not really get like a full arc, you know? This subplot of Portia wanting Felicity to marry Colin is also kind of a nothing plot. It's introduced in this chapter and then it's never mentioned again until Colin comes to ask Portia's permission to marry Penelope, like hundreds of pages later. It's kind of like the Featherington subplot of season 2 in that like, okay, there's some payoff here, but like, was this really necessary? Then Eloise comes to tell Pen that Colin's home, which again, she already knows. Can y'all tell I'm already fed up with this book? This is mostly to set up the Penelope's dynamic more than anything, which is obviously vastly different from the show. Eloise's characterization alone in the show is a major departure from the books. And honestly, I'm glad for it because I think it makes Eloise a much more interesting character. Is she my favorite character? No. She's very much into feminism only as it concerns and affects her life and circumstances. I do think that'll be a part of her character growth over the course of the show, at least I hope. But my point is, like, she has flaws. She has humor in the show. I like the role that she plays within the Bridgerton family dynamic. I can't fully speak to her characterization in the books because I haven't read her book. My only experience with her is basically this book. I don't even remember her in books 1 through 3 because I blocked them all out. So yeah. And Eloise is boring in this book to me. I feel like, yes, Penelope's in the book have a deeper friendship than Polin do, but I feel like a lot of their interactions in this book are still very surface level. And maybe part of it is that like a lot of their interactions are them talking about things that Pen has already talked about with other characters. And so I'm just like, you know, what is this adding to the story? Something that I do think is interesting. To a certain extent, their friendship is kind of unequal, both in the book and in the show. I think the show kind of heightens it and fleshes it out more. Like Pen obviously hides a lot from Eloise, both Lady Whistledown and her feelings for Colin. Again, both in the book and in the show. Pen in the book thinks that Elle suspects her feelings for Colin, but she doesn't know for sure because they've never talked about it. So we don't know. But in the show, I think a lot of their friendship revolves around what's going on with Eloise and not as much what's going on with Pen. And I do think to an extent that's on purpose on Pen's part, because if Eloise isn't paying as close attention to Pen, then it's easier for Pen to keep both of her secrets to herself. That's a big part of Pen's relationship with Colin too, though, and I do think it'll be interesting to see how those very similar issues play out in different relationships. And will Eloise have any effect on Colin's perspective about the whole Lady Whistledown of it all? Or will Colin have any effect on Eloise's perspective? While it is sad that Pen and Elle will be on the outs this season, I do think the both of them are gonna come out the other end of it stronger, both as friends and as individuals. Again, we'll talk more about that later. I do hope that Pen finds some companionship with Francesca. We do have that still of them standing next to each other at the first ball of the season. And I think Francesca is gonna be as close as a Bridgerton can get to being a wallflower. Obviously, she is still a Bridgerton, all eyes are on her, but I think it'd be sweet to see them kind of bond over, you know, struggling to navigate the marriage mart, you know, because it's not their natural environment, shall we say. Okay, last part of chapter 1 is Colin's return from Colin's point of view. Something that I love that the show does differently from the books is kind of add a little bit more depth to Colin's wanderlust. It was always like his plan to travel, like from the beginning of season 1, but by the end of it, you know, a big part of it had to do with kind of escaping from the Marina breakup. I also love that his travels are how Colin and Penn build their friendship in the show through the letters that they've exchanged while he was gone. And I feel like that was our first taste of Colin and Penn bonding over a shared love of writing, even if they don't really know it yet. In the book, I get frustrated with Colin though, because, you know, he's been traveling for so long and he enjoys it, but he's tired of it, but he feels like he has to do it and he doesn't know why. And I'm like, dude, you are 33 years old. You've had plenty of time to mull this over. And Penn later spells it all out for him because it's obvious what the issue is, but I digress. We get a little bit of Colin's inner monologue about his struggle to find his purpose. A big part of the book is that, you know, Antony's found his purpose as Viscount, Ben's found his purpose as an artist, an accomplished artist, and Colin hasn't found his purpose yet. Something that I find really interesting about the show and the changes they've made to the timeline is that Colin and Ben's insecurities really play off one another. Like, they each think that the other has it more together in the show when they're both really struggling with much the same thing. Colin thinks Ben has found his purpose with art, and Colin doesn't really know what he wants to do with his life yet. Ben feels like Colin's had these amazing experiences with his travels and has gained a better sense of who he is, when Ben feels like he has no sense of self. I do wonder if either of them might open up to each other about that in season 3. And I do wonder if watching Colin find his happily ever after is going to bring Ben to an even lower point than he was at the end of season 2 and set him up for his season. Because I do think Ben is going to be season 4. I don't really feel like they have much further to stretch his storyline out. Eloise still has plenty of room to grow and change before she's ready to be married. I even think they could conceivably make Francesca season 5 and push Eloise to season 6. I'm not saying that I think they will do that. I'm saying I think they could do that. Okay, back to Colin, still agonizing over his purpose. He hopes that when he was gone, he'd been memorialized in some manner other than in Lady Whistledown Society papers. This is an interesting thread to me. So book Colin, we find out, takes issue with how Lady Whistledown kind of portrays him in her column. And we'll get to that when we get there. I think the Marina of it all makes Penn's reveal as Lady Whistledown like enough of a betrayal. And she obviously hurt Eloise's reputation as well, and Colin's very protective of his family. I do wonder if by the time he finds out in the show, he's still grappling with what his purpose is, and the idea of being memorialized only by Lady Whistledown's words, which have hurt him so deeply. I think that adds interesting layers to the betrayal. We end the chapter with Antony saying, you know, it's time for you to settle down, Colin. I want you to be happy. So my final thoughts on chapter 1. I have such mixed feelings about the timeline change. On the one hand, I'm happy that it's not going to take him another 11 years to figure out that he's in love with Penn in the show. As we find out in season 2 from Ben, he is 1 in 20, which means in season 3, he will be 2 in 20. Happy, free, confused, and lonely at the same time. I did mention I'd be using metallic pens for song lyrics, so I had to find a way to shoehorn that one in there. It's miserable and magical indeed, Colin. So yeah, I like that Colin doesn't take a truly absurdly long time to fall in love with poor Penn. She's been so patient in these books. However, I do like that book Colin, well, I don't know, maybe this isn't even an issue, but I feel like book Colin has a lot more material from his travels for writer Colin. Maybe this is something I don't have to be worried about in the show, like maybe he's done enough traveling, but like them bonding over that shared love of writing is one of the shining aspects of their relationship. There is a still of him at a desk with what appears to be a journal, and we know we get the hand cut scene, which very much had a lot to do with the journal, but they could still change how the hand cut scene happens. I don't know. Perhaps young Colin developed a love of writing while he was still in school or something, or maybe just Penn brings it out in him in season 3. Editing that here, y'all, Penn hasn't been responding to his letters this year. She was the one person who wanted to know every single detail about his travels, and she's not responding this year. So I guess Colin will really be only, recording his memories for himself. And I think I read somewhere recently too that he goes to like 16 cities or something. That's a decent amount of material, I feel like. Surely not as much traveling as Book Colin has done because he's just had more time, but I think that's doable, right? And Luke has been talking about how like he returns from his travels this year and he doesn't feel the need to brag about it like last season. And so I really feel like he was writing about his travels this year purely for himself, and he doesn't really feel the need to share it. But Penn's gonna find it and she's gonna be like, but you should share this. This is so good. Oh my God. I'm gonna cry. Update, we do indeed have writer Colin confirmed, so no need for me to stress out about it. If I do stress out about it more, it is what it is. Let's move on to chapter 2. For goodness sakes, this is gonna be very long, huh? So we open chapter 2 with Lady Whistledown lamenting about how boring the season is. And y'all, I don't think we have to worry about that with season 3. By all accounts, the season sounds jam-packed with drama and romance. This book really feels like Julia Quinn was either getting really tired of Lady Whistledown or just running out of ideas. Having said that, Penn has been doing this for like 10 years, give or take. So it does make sense for her to be losing steam. Show Penn, on the other hand, I think has a lot left to say. I don't think she's anywhere near done. Again, we'll talk about that more later. Y'all could probably play a drinking game with how many times I've said that. Be careful out there, y'all. If you struggle to stay hydrated, maybe play the drinking game with water. You know what? I might do that. So after the Lady Whistledown excerpt, we find ourselves at a ball with Penn kind of hovering on the edge of things as she does as a spinster wallflower. What I like about the show, having revealed Penn as Lady Whistledown back at the end of season 1, is that it reveals a lot of like her kind of hidden agency as a character. In the book, she comes across as very passive because there's this whole side of her that is being hidden from us. But with the Lady Whistledown reveal, we obviously learn that that's kind of strategic on her part. But it's kind of hard to get invested in her character in the books because she's just shy and unassuming until she's outed, and then you realize like she's embodied this persona partially because it's been bestowed on her by society and partially because she really is shy. Like Lady Whistledown was her way of finding the courage to say the things that she felt like she couldn't say in real life, but also it kept her secret safe for her to kind of keep herself within that box that society put her in. And there's so much to mine from all of that this book doesn't really have the time to do, because we don't get the Lady Whistledown reveal until about halfway through the book, whereas we get it at the end of season 1, and then in season 2 we get to see behind the curtain a little bit with Penn's Lady Whistledown endeavors. Penn and Colin reunite at the ball, and it's pretty underwhelming. Very small talky, and I hate small talks, but we know their reunion in season 3 is going to be rife with tension, and I can't wait. He does compliment her dress, and that kind of breaks the ice, and it's a sweet moment, but I do want to read this passage that I underlined. It was strange because one would think her tongue would be tied, the tightest around the man she loved, but there was something about Colin that set everyone at ease. Okay, we've obviously talked about this a lot at this point. But something I haven't mentioned though is that I do think that this drive that Colin has to put everyone around him at ease is part of what fuels his hero complex. I think it comes out a little bit less in the books, but it's very apparent in the show. So I think that finding out that he's hurt Penn from the Goodnight Mr. Bridgerton scene is going to be kind of a double whammy for him, in that, not only is he the reason that Penn is no longer comfortable being around him, but his last memory of her is saving her family from Cousin Jack's scheme. And so I think he's going to spiral and need to fix things ASAP, and I hope we get some good Chaos Colin moments from it. Okay, so there's this whole exchange that happens where Penn's trying to get rid of this half-eaten eclair, and Colin's like, put it in a plant. And she's like, no, I couldn't. And he's like, I dare you. And she does. And then he's like, well, that was my mother's favorite potted palm. And she's like, oh shit. And then, wait a second. That's an orange tree. And you know, they seem to find this exchange amusing. I find it tedious, but to each their own. I feel like this scene is trying to be the What a Barb scene from season 1, because it's supposed to be this like turning point where Colin starts to see Penn in a different light. And I find it very underwhelming in the book, whereas the What a Barb scene is iconic, so iconic in fact, it is the namesake of my new favorite podcast. So Colin's musing over Penelope's wit, and then we have this passage. His inner monologue is like, he wasn't surprised that she'd never attracted any serious suitors for her hand. She wasn't a beauty by any stretch. Although, upon close examination, she was more attractive than he remembered her to be. Why do people like these books? Obviously, he changes his tune later, but it's not enough. I don't need him to be lavishing praise upon her beauty at this point in the book, but how is this supposed to endear me to him as a character, much less a love interest? I don't even have the energy to talk about how he goes on from there. Like, it all gives me an eye twitch. So their conversation continues, and he surprises himself by asking her to dance. I do consider this like our first tiny little hint at Chaos Colin, where he just makes a split-second decision and then examines the feelings behind it later, much later. She's all like, you don't have to like ask me to dance out of pity anymore. I'm a spinster now, it's all good. Because she's well aware that Violet would always ask her sons to dance with her at balls when she was younger. And she's like, you know, this isn't necessary anymore. And Colin acts all offended, as if he's never asked her to dance out of pity and she isn't well aware of this fact. Like, dude, don't insult my pen's intelligence, okay? Instead of getting all pissy about it, just tell her that you genuinely want to dance with her. In fact, beg her, because she deserves it after waiting all of this time for your dumb ass to come around. Anyway, he manages to convince her to dance with him, and she feels a little bit bad for doubting his sincerity or whatever, and he sees her grimace and he's like, was something wrong with that, Eclair? And she can't hear him because the dance is like separating them. And then he like shouts for everyone to hear, you look as if you've swallowed something vile. And at this point, I need him to stop talking forever. So they finish their terrible dance and they're about to part ways when Lady Danbury makes a beeline, if you will, for Colin. Sorry, was that insensitive? Colin's like, save me, I'll pay you if you don't leave me alone with her. Now this exchange I enjoy. I don't know if Show Colin needs Penn's help with Lady Danbury, you know, like, especially after his glow up, I think he's all like confident about his ability to charm anybody. But Lady Danbury is quite the formidable woman, so who knows? But we've talked about Colin's hero complex a little bit. I'd like to see Penn come to Colin's rescue at some point in season 3. Maybe even a few times in season 3. I think that'd be fun. So Lady Danbury joins the party and praises his choice of dance partner in Penn. And some fun, if a little repetitive, back and forth between the trio ensues. I do like how this scene shifts the dynamic by having Colin openly appreciate Penn's wit with Lady Danbury. I do feel like Show Colin is gonna need to have a similar moment where he's like openly appreciating her around others, but I feel like he needs to also do it in private first. Even get your heads out of the gutters, y'all, we're not there yet. He needs to tell Penn how great she is in private in order for her to understand his compliments in public to be sincere. So let's talk about Lady Danbury for a bit. So I'm wondering if Lady Danbury will notice Penn on her own in the show, or if it will be both her and Queen Charlotte. She usually does take on a matchmaking role with Violet, usually in previous seasons, in both of the previous seasons. But will she feel like she bungled season 2 so badly that she needs to take a step back from it? Or will she want to redeem her success rate? We do know that Violet will be pretty busy with both Francesca and Eloise. So will Lady Danbury bring the Queen into it? Will that spell trouble for Penn? Will she try to use it to her advantage as Lady Whistledown? This could really up the stakes on the Whistledown front. I'm trying to remember how much they've said about what the queen's up to this season. I know there's speculation about an emerald of the season, but other than that, I don't know where she's at with the Whistledown. I feel like I forget. I remember being worried for Penn with all of the Whistledown papers coming out in the Queen Charlotte spinoff. It felt like, you know, she might be testing the boundaries a little bit too much here, getting into dangerous waters. Back to the book, there's a bit where Penn's like, what can't you get away with at your age? And Lady Danbury's like, well, I don't think I could get away with murder. Her and Colin crack up because she just told Colin that she thinks he could get away with murder. Is it really that funny though? Then they start talking about how boring the season is, and they bring more people into the conversation, which starts kind of a running gag of like Penn saying something around somebody and then being like, oh, Miss Featherington, I didn't see you there. Annoying. The conversation itself, again, is repetitive, but it all culminates in Lady Danbury announcing that she will award £1,000 to whoever can unmask Lady Whistledown. I am somewhat skeptical of this being a storyline in the show for a few reasons. One, I keep coming back to Luke's comment about the show being unpredictable. If they keep too many storylines from the book, doesn't the show kind of get a little predictable? I mean, they're good at doing their own takes on things, but the show tends to diverge quite a bit from the source material. We already know that they tried to cram a bunch of the iconic Polin scenes from this book into season 3. I feel like adding this storyline, they'd be making season 3 way more similar to the books than they've ever done before, and I don't really feel like that's their style. Secondly, the Lady Whistledown voiceovers function a lot like Meredith's voiceovers in Grey's Anatomy, in that they tie all of the storylines in a given episode together. In the book, Lady Whistledown will either like kind of introduce what's going to happen in a chapter or just give extra tidbits of information. And as we see in this book, she's kind of losing steam. So it makes sense to reveal her in the book, whereas in the show, she's a much more important narrative device. That I don't think it makes sense for her identity to be any under major threat by the entire ton. Minor threat, sure. There's always been a question of how long can Penn get away with it in each of the previous seasons. But I do think we're going to keep asking that question for a few more seasons to come, at least. I could see them maybe doing their own version of this storyline where like some people find out, but that's the most I will concede. And even it still doesn't feel right to me, because it's like the more people find out, the more likely the secret gets out, right? We'll continue to talk more about this throughout the vlog. I assure you this is not the last I have to say on the matter. So chapter 3 covers the aftermath of Lady Danbury's challenge, as well as like the following day when Penn runs into Colin on her way to have tea with the Bridgerton, and they walk there together. So we're still at the ball. Nigel Burbrook is a very different character in the book than he is in the show. And he actually marries Philippa, I believe, in the books. But there's a moment where he says that Lady Danbury's latest scheme is scrumbly good fun. This, to me, based on the little that we know about Dankworth's character, feels like such a Dankworth line. And I need him to say this at some point. I don't care what the context is, like this could be said about anything. I feel like I'm getting my hopes up too high for this, but I want it. We're also going to make note of a little bit of Penn's inner monologue. So she's asking Colin who he thinks Lady Whistledown is, and he's like, I got nothing, and she's not buying it. And in her head, she's like, the ton often thought him nothing more than a devil-may-care charmer, but he was far more intelligent than he let on, and she'd have better life that he had a few suspicion. This is going to come into play in a few chapters, so remember this. Colin asks Penn who she thinks it is, and she's like, I think it's Lady Danbury. And he'd be like, well, that'd be a clever joke to play on everyone. And she's like, you don't agree with me, do you? And he's like, am I that easy to read? And he says, I fear it will never be my destiny to be a dark, brooding hero. Hero, Colin, nice to meet you. So Eloise runs up to them and tells them about Lady Danbury's challenge, and they were like, we were literally right there when it happened. And I'm like, what is the point of having the same exact conversation so many times? Can we please move on? However, However, it did get me thinking. Even though I'm skeptical of the show keeping this whole Lady Whistledown storyline, it would be an interesting thing to have the rest of the town actively trying to figure out who Lady Whistledown is when Eloise is like the only one who knows and choosing to stay out of it. Lady Danbury asks Penn who she thinks it is, and Colin kind of eggs Penn on, and that gives her the confidence to say to Lady Danbury's face that she thinks it's her. Especially ballsy when we know that it's actually her. Another reason that I'm glad that the show let the audience in on it sooner than the book. I expect Julia Quinn wanted like the reread value of it all, which sure. Lady Danbury is impressed, and Colin's like really proud of her, and that this is gonna hit so much harder in the show. Like that first moment that Penn really comes into her own, and Colin's like, that's my Penn. Because in the show, he's actually offering to help her get to this point, and he's gonna make her see that she had it in her all along, and he always knew it. Whereas in the book, he's proud of her and he's impressed by her, but he is frequently surprised by her boldness in the beginning. Like, book Colin didn't know that Penn had it in her. And again, this is an example here, I think, of where I feel like the show is gonna be a true friend to lovers arc for them, more so than the book. So Lady Danbury is also very impressed by Penn, and she says, isn't it nice to discover that we're not exactly who we thought we were? Now, this is a line where I wouldn't be totally gutted if it wasn't in the show, but I do think I would like to see it. Julia Quinn has said that this season has more direct quotes from the book than in previous seasons. So I'm keeping an eye out for the contenders, and I do think that this is one of them. And this is a line too that could be used in so many different contexts. So if it is there, it'll be interesting to see how the show brings it out. I think there will be some lines from the book that happen either exactly how they happen in the book or similarly to how they happen in the book, and then there are going to be some lines that show up in totally different scenes in totally new ways, and this is what I love about adaptation, y'all. So the next day, Penn's on her way to tea with the Bridgerton ladies at number 5. You know, she goes over there pretty frequently, but she always shows up on Monday. Penn thinks that if, you know, she didn't show up on a Monday, then Lady Bridgerton would send somebody to fetch her, and it's gonna be so sad. So obviously, with Penn and Elle on the out this season, she won't be over as much. I would love it if Violet actually did try to send for Penn. I don't think she will. I think Violet has a lot on her plate with Fran and Elle and, you know, tending to her garden. Violet's got her hands full this season, and I think that if she knew it would make Eloise upset, she wouldn't invite Penn over. But I really want a moment of her being like, I miss having Penelope around, you know? So Penn's really chuffed about what Lady Danbury said at the ball about being more than she thought she was. One might say she's frolicking down Berkeley Square. And this scene is one of those iconic moments that we really want to see in the show. So Colin kind of comes out of nowhere and he's like, were you dancing? And she's like, I don't know what you're talking about. He's like, well, that's a shame. I would have asked to join you. It is a shame, Colin. We would have loved to see you guys dance together in Berkeley Square. If they don't keep this scene in the show, I will be devastated, and we need a scene that is 10 times better to make up for it. Colin's like, I've never danced in Berkeley Square before, and she's like, well, it's very enjoyable. And he's like, aha, you were dancing, so this dance must be mine. And she's like, we can't dance in public. Okay, so Penn's obviously worried about, you know, people seeing them dancing together in public and thinking that they're courting. And we get a moment of Colin's inner monologue where he's like, it was on the tip of his tongue to say hang society, but he held silent. There was something lurking deep in the brown depths of her eyes, some emotion he couldn't even begin to identify, an emotion he suspected he'd never even felt. And he realized that the last thing he wanted to do was hurt Penelope Featherington. We have had plenty of moments of show Colin really putting his foot in it with Penn because he's just like so in his own head that he doesn't really consider the impact that his words might have on her. I like that book Colin has this awareness that because his experiences are very different from hers, that he doesn't know why dismissing her concerns might hurt her, but he knows that it would. And he just lets her explain why. If only he'd remember the skill of emotional perception later on in the book. Penn explains that if they were seen dancing together in Berkeley Square, then the town would assume that they were courting, and when it became apparent that they actually weren't, they would assume that Colin called it off because Penn's a spinster and Colin's a Bridgerton, and she just doesn't want to open herself up to that kind of gossip and ridicule, which is totally understandable. Colin apologizes, and we like when he's not being a dick. I do love this scene. I don't think that a direct adaptation of it makes sense for the show because we've already had Colin publicly reject her, and he's gonna find out how that impacted her. But I would love for the show to find a way to incorporate Berkeley Square in some way. Another moment of inner monologue from Colin that I wanted to point out, but maybe he wasn't thinking about this the right way. It was easy to assume that you didn't care about the opinions of others when those opinions were consistently favorable. I do think show Colin very much cares about what other people think of him. I think his ego took a huge hit when Lady Whistledown revealed Marina's deception. I hate using that word. I don't like to villainize Marina because she was just trying to make the best of a really shitty and honestly scary situation. But I do think in the aftermath of all of that, Colin is very concerned about what other people think of him. After he announced the engagement, Anthony kind of infantilizes him. He's like, you're still very green. You don't know Marina very well, and you don't know what you're getting into. But Lady Whistledown exposed his naivete to the entire ton. And I imagine Colin still hears Anthony's words ringing in his head, even after all of this time, in much the same way that his words are probably ringing in Penn's head. Back to book Colin. Would he be so quick to dismiss the rest of society if they treated him the way they treated Penelope? This is a level of awareness that I don't think show Colin has yet, at least. I think that both him and Eloise forget that Penn isn't as well liked as their family is because they like her, which is sweet in a way, but Colin needs to have more awareness of how his behavior around Penn is perceived by the ton. And I think the Goodnight Mr. Bridgerton theme will be a big wake-up call for him, but don't overcorrect because we still need chaos Colin. More conversation passes that I don't really feel like talking about. Okay. So Colin's real concerned about her walking alone from her house to theirs, even though it's not that far. There's a part where he's like, I was just looking to see if there were any darkened or recessed spots where criminals might lurk. Hero Colin, nice to see you again. Then she starts teasing him for not being married yet at 33 years old, and she calls him ancient, our cheeky Penn. And she asks, weren't both of your older brothers married by the age of 30? And he says, my brothers and I are very different men. This is where I get my chance to say that I really like how so far in the show, they haven't made Colin out to be a rake like his brothers. I don't know if Colin this season, like I mentioned how I think Anthony's words are still ringing in his head, and like he wants to be perceived as more grown up and less green, as it were. I kind of feel like if that is the case, if he is trying to be more rakish, I feel like it's still all kind of a front, you know, like a performance of a version of himself that he thinks that he should be. I feel like Colin really needs someone to simp over, and I feel like, you know, he's the brother that's kind of always been the hopeless romantic, even if that was shattered for a little bit in the aftermath of season 1. I think it's coming back in season 3. I hope it does. Okay. That's all I care to talk about for chapter 3. So they made it to number 5, and it's time to have tea. Ugh, do I even want to talk about the Lady Whistledown passage in this chapter? It's like my least favorite one in the book. So basically, this person danced with this person, who danced with this person, etc. And it all comes back to Penelope, who talked to the first person, and isn't it a shame that she didn't actually dance with that person, because it would have been a perfect circle. Again, I really feel like Lady Whistledown is losing steam here. What is the point? Honestly, there's not much that I want to talk about for this chapter. It's all just the Bridgerton tea, and it's meant to kind of display the family dynamics and how Penelope factors into it. But the dialogue is so tedious. And y'all, they're talking about like English sentence structure, and if you've known me for any amount of time, you know how hard it is to make me annoyed with a conversation about linguistics. Actually, it's not that difficult if you bring so-called proper English into the discussion, but I digress. Blah, blah, blah. Debates about Lady Whistledown's identity. At one point, Eloise says, I'd much rather be a spinster than be married to a boor, as would Penelope. Again, there's this disconnect between Penelope and Eloise. And we kind of addressed this in season 1 when Eloise was like, you don't want to get married, and Penn was like, but what if I do? I do wonder if show Colin kind of assumed that Penn is like Eloise and doesn't want to get married, or at least isn't in any rush to. Obviously, she's in quite a bit of a rush this upcoming season. She's got to get the fuck out of that house. Penn's inner dialogue in response to Eloise's assertion. She told herself she wouldn't have accepted in any case since her heart belonged to Colin, but was that really the truth, or was she just trying to make herself feel better for having been such a resounding failure on the marriage mart? If someone asked her to marry him tomorrow, someone perfectly kind and acceptable whom she might never love, but would in all probability like very well, would she say yes? Probably. This is where I feel like the adaptation is taking a very different route in the storytelling, but still keeping true to the spirit of these characters, because there's still room for Penelope to grapple with these kinds of questions, just in a different context. She's gonna have to face the reality of probably marrying someone who isn't Colin. That's gonna be hard for her. Don't worry though, Penn, hero Colin will rescue you from marrying Debling. So sorry, Debling. I love you, but I love Colin more. More Lady Whistledown theorizing. It's kind of fun, if a bit lengthy. It just feels like filler to me, honestly. That's chapter 4. Chapter 5. Oh, okay, yay. So we get to talk about the hand cut scene, which is confirmed to be in the show in episode 2. I'm curious how similar or different this scene ends up being. So basically, the next day, or like a couple days later, Penn goes back to number 5 to meet up with Eloise, who is out with Violet, obviously, in the show. That part will be different because Penn and Eloise are on the outs. Anyway, she waits in the informal drawing room and she finds a book lying open on a table. She goes over to check it out. She finds out it's a journal. One of Colin's travel journals, in fact. And she feels guilty about it, but she's curious, so she starts reading. Colin catches her and is rightfully upset about it. Penn is so shaken by Colin's reaction. She'd never imagined that he could have a temper. And I think in an earlier chapter, she actually does think, like, she could never imagine Colin being angry. I'm kind of bummed I didn't make note of that foreshadowing. Anyways, Penn is so flustered by Colin's reaction that she's just like, well, it was open and this is a public room and you should have just brought it with you if you didn't want anybody to read it. And like, babe, just apologize. You know, you knew when you were reading it that this was an invasion of privacy. And it feels so out of character for her. Like, everything we've learned about her up until this point is that she's very, like, non-confrontational. She rushes to apologize when her bonnet flies in his face in the prologue. Like, I would have assumed that the first thing out of her mouth would be an apology. I get that she's, like, becoming less timid now and all, but, like, she felt guilty while she was reading the journal. They kind of go back and forth for a little bit, and Penn's like, why are you making it so difficult to apologize to you? And he's like, why should I make it easy? And she's like, because it would be the nice thing to do. So we come back to the pedestal that Penn puts Colin on. I think in a way the scene is supposed to do what the I'd Never Dream of Courting Penelope Featherington scene does at the end of 208, which is kind of this shattering of the illusion of him being this person who is always kind. Because the book version where he's like, I'm certainly not going to marry Penelope Featherington, like, it doesn't do that. It kind of confirms what she already believes, which is that he would never be deliberately cruel to somebody. And she knows that he feels bad that she heard what he said. And so here, she's like, this isn't nice. And like, no, but neither is snooping through someone's private journal. And I think that's why this scene doesn't really work for me as the scene that shatters the illusion, because this is a perfectly normal reaction to an invasion of privacy. Although she does still kind of continue to be surprised whenever he gets angry, like later on in the book. So I can't say it's like a complete shattering of the illusion, more like the first crack in the glass, I guess. Anyways, he's so angry that he accidentally cuts his hand open with a letter opener, and that kind of stops the argument in its tracks. And Penn's reaction is so great. The audiobook isn't like my favorite thing, but the delivery on this line is so perfect. She's like, oh, the carpet. And he's like, ever the attentive nurse. And she's like, well, you're not gonna die, and the carpet can't get bloodstains, okay? So what I love about the idea of this exchange still being in the show is the added layer of 208. Obviously, they have this truth, and he's helping her find a husband and all that. But again, I'm sure the words are still ringing in her ears. I like the idea that, you know, she gets to have this kind of little dig at him, and, you know, he has his response ever the attentive nurse, which he clarifies as a joke, and it kind of breaks the ice from the journal argument. I like the idea that it might also kind of break the ice of the leftover tension from 208. But I'm so glad that we have confirmation of this scene, because it is obviously a pretty big, intimate moment between them, because not only is she tending to his wounds with bare hands, but she's just found out that they share a love of writing. And within the next few pages, he finds out that she really enjoys his writing, which means a lot to him. And, you know, he's asking her, like, what about my writing resonated so strongly with you? What'll be really special about the scene in the show is that presumably by this point, you know, he'll have already witnessed some of her insecurities, having taken on that mentor role and given her some lessons. But this could be the first time that she sees some of his insecurities. Like, she knows he's still searching for his purpose, but he has yet to really be vulnerable with her. It's a pretty big moment. He talks a little bit about how traveling, like, isn't enough for him, and she's like, then why do you keep leaving? And he says, I can't help it. It's like a disease. And she kind of dismisses this. She's like, don't be ridiculous. The disease is harmful. It's clear that your travels feed your soul. It's a sweet thing for her to say, but it's clear that even though he loves traveling, there's something constantly eating away at him. And I think it'd be interesting to delve more into this idea of him comparing his wanderlust to a disease. We saw a little bit of this in season 2 when he's like introducing the tea to Benedict, and he talks about like the doubts that seem to linger no matter how far you try to go to escape them. And Benedict's like, are you quite well, brother? No, he is not. So the bleeding's almost stopped. I will read one final passage from this chapter. In truth, he suspected the bleeding had stopped altogether, but he was reluctant to let the conversation end, and he knew that the moment she was done caring for him, she would go. He didn't think she wanted to go, but he somehow knew that she would. She'd think it was the proper thing to do, and she'd probably also think it was what he wanted. Nothing, he was surprised to realize, could be further from the truth, and nothing could have scared him more. This is when we need Chaos Colin to emerge in the show. But the way that I want that to happen comes later in the book. So I shall hold off on that thought. Hey y'all, we are back for chapter 6. I have not tabbed up the next section of chapters yet because I didn't really feel like it. I don't do it while I annotate because it takes too long. But whenever I do get around to finishing up the tabs, I will be sure to show y'all what it looks like. But let's go ahead and dive into chapter 6, shall we? We get a short Lady Whistledown excerpt this time. It's just, everyone has secrets, especially me. No shit. What was the point of this? Anyways, they continue talking about Colin's writing. There's not a whole lot at the beginning of this chapter that I want to talk about until Penn says, it's good to have something in your life, something satisfying that will fill the hours with a sense of purpose. I love the idea that Penn could be planting this seed for Colin as early as episode 2 of season 3 when the hand cut scene happens, that this thing that he kind of stumbled into, writing, that is, could have been what he was looking for all this time. Kind of like their relationship, you know? It was right in front of him this whole time, and he thought he hadn't found it yet. Colin, you gotta work on that introspection, bud. Okay, so Colin tries to open up to Penn about how his travels aren't enough for him anymore, and we learn that he takes issue with how Lady Whistledown portrays him as just a charming person but without any real substance to him. He's having a hard time articulating his feelings, and Penn obviously has written worse things about herself in Whistledown, and she knows that everything she wrote about him in Whistledown was only ever meant to be complimentary. So this leads to an argument between them because everything that Colin is saying comes across to Penn as insensitive and ungrateful for the privileges that he has in his life, you know, his popularity, a loving family, wealth, etc. Colin is trying so hard not to come across this way. He's like, I don't mean to sound ungrateful, I just am having trouble. This is a thing that really frustrates me about about their argument is that Pen's not really listening to him. And I understand that it comes from this place of society belittles me constantly and everyone loves you, so I don't understand what you have to be upset about. And he's like, I'm sick of being thought an empty-headed charmer. And she's like, no one thinks you're stupid. Pen, my love, I'm gonna need you to refer back to page 58. When you thought to yourself, the Ton often thought him nothing more than a devil-may-care charmer, but he was far more intelligent than he let on. So that makes this argument even more annoying because she's dismissing his feelings altogether when she herself thought the very thing that he's trying to tell her he feels insecure about. It's frustrating. I do feel like a scene like this isn't really necessary for season 3 because season 2 establishes that Pen already knows and understands his insecurities, at least to an extent. I don't think their conflict is going to be as much about the disparities between how he thinks society perceives him versus how she thinks society perceives him. I think it'll be more about his self-perception measuring up to his action. Colin gives up on trying to explain what he's feeling. And she does say, if you want a new direction for your life, then for heaven's sake, just pick something out and do it. The world is your oyster, Colin. You're young, wealthy, and you're a man. You can do anything you want. This is fair. I don't disagree with her on that point. But again, this all annoys me because he's clearly having so much trouble verbalizing his insecurities, and she's not even trying to look deeper into it and figure out where this disconnect is happening. And at this point in the story, her feelings for him are supposed to be much deeper than his are for her. You'd think the first time your lifelong crush tries to open up to you about something, you make more of an effort to try and understand them even if it's difficult. Ooh, but have we stumbled into something kind of interesting here? Who she's seeing right now is not the Colin she has a crush on. The Colin she has a crush on isn't real. She's made him up in her head. And this is the first time we really see her be frustrated with him, and she storms out. Colin feels really shitty about the whole thing. He feels like he might have ruined their friendship, and it makes him realize for the first time that he really values that friendship. Dude, compared to the show version of yourself, you're doing great. Maybe we don't need to go that far. I've read some really annoying inner monologue from you at this point. Point is, Colin's really taken aback. He'd only been back in England for a fortnight, but already Penelope had changed. Or maybe he'd changed. Or maybe she hadn't changed, but the way he saw her had changed. She mattered. He didn't know how else to put it. And after 10 years of her just being there, it was rather bizarre for her to matter quite so much. Speaking of annoying inner monologue. But this does really highlight my point of the show being more of a true friend to lovers arc than the book. Book Polin kind of goes from budding friendship to lovers, and that Colin is so taken aback by how scared he is to lose her just doesn't hit as hard as show Colin actively missing her while he's away on his travels and wishing she'd write back to him and just already knowing that she does mean a lot to him. You know, we give him a lot of shit for telling her that she's special to him and then turning around and saying something so mean-spirited behind her back. But every time I rewatch episode 8, and he says, you're special to me, I still believe him, even though I know what's coming next. All right, what else is in this chapter? I don't know if y'all have heard, but Colin's really jealous that his older brothers have already found their purpose. Okay, now we gotta go to one of the infamous Smythe-Smith musicales to make amends with Pen. The Smythe-Smith musicale is one of the most dreaded events of the season. It's basically this family of young girls who are not so musically inclined, and they play music for the entire ton. Pen first explained to us in her inner monologue that she always goes despite it being unenjoyable because she's used to being the butt of the joke in the ton, and while most of the young girls playing are completely oblivious to their lack of musical talent, there's always one girl who is very much aware, and she wants to be a kind face in the audience for that girl. Just in case we missed it the first time, Pen goes on to explain all of this to Felicity, and just in case we still weren't getting it, Lady Danbury then joins the conversation and is like, this is why Lady Whistledown won't make fun of the girls in her column. And Pen's like, yeah, that's why I come here every year. We get it. Can we please move on? I do think that this is the point where Lady Danbury clocks Pen as Lady Whistledown. And that got me thinking, if Lady Danbury and Queen Charlotte are on the Lady Whistledown case this season, as Lady Danbury gets to know Pen and gets invested in her and maybe sees a little bit of herself in her, would she clock Pen as Lady Whistledown and vouch for her with Queen Charlotte? An interesting thread to ponder. Oh, Lady Danbury does say that she thinks Pen is Lady Whistledown, so I was right. More Lady Whistledown talk ensues that frankly I'm quite tired of. The conversation takes so many detours and is tedious. Colin joins the group just as the show is about to start. Once it's over, he asks Pen if they can talk, and they both apologize for their little spat. I like that Pen recognizes that she wasn't truly empathizing with him and was kind of twisting his words a little bit. I also like that Colin has the humility to acknowledge how insensitive he was to her very different experiences in the town in light of his many privileges. This is a good moment of growth in their relationship, them seeing outside of themselves in the conflict and coming to a greater understanding of each other. I would like to see a scene like this, but better in the show. Pen starts encouraging him to publish his travel journals, and he's like, I don't like the possibility of gaining success based on my family name and not on the merit of my work. And she's like, well, even if people start reading your journals because you're a Bridgerton, eventually they'll keep reading because you're good. And again, he's like, I don't like the idea of becoming successful off of the Bridgerton name. And she's like, did you listen to what I just said? This is where Colin starts to annoy me. Pen was annoying me in the last chapter for not really listening to Colin. For the rest of the book, it's Colin not listening to Pen. Luckily, before Colin can get my blood pressure too high, Eloise interrupts the conversation and tries to pry into Colin's business. Both Colin and Pen are like, this is a private matter between the both of us. And Eloise is appalled that Pen won't betray Colin's confidence. Again, I need a moment like this in the show because it's even more juicy because Elle now has less access to Colin and Pen, not only because they now have a relationship that exists outside of her, but also because her and Pen are on the outs this season. That's not to say that Colin won't confide in Eloise. I think we've heard that there are some really sweet moments between them this season, but that Eloise is really gonna feel a disconnect with both of them, I think is just so much more interesting in the show than it is in the book. Some sibling bickering ensues and Pen finds it all very amusing and she's like, I can't remember a nicer evening. Truly, I can't. Well, all right then. I'm glad for you, Pen. As Colin lays in bed later, he realizes that he feels much the same way. That's sweet. So the next day, Colin comes to call on Pen and she's so excited. She rushes down to see him and she finds him. He's like quite the bundle of nerves and she's like, dude, what's wrong? And he kind of stalls the conversation for a bit. Can't with the dialogue in this book. He's like asking for food and stuff, and then finally a million years later he's like, I think Eloise might be Lady Whistledown because she's always hiding in her room writing stuff and there's ink stains all over her fingers. And this is funny because obviously we know it's Pen, but also, his suspicions are based on some pretty flimsy evidence. Chaos Colin is definitely coming into play a little bit here. Once he's made up his mind about something, he cannot be swayed from it, and he is full on catastrophizing here. He's like, Eloise is gonna be ruined. We gotta do something. I cannot fathom watching someone spiral like this and not being like, dude, it's me, just to get them to shut up, you know? Pen has a lot more restraint and willpower than I do. So the idea that Show Colin might also suspect Eloise to be Lady Whistledown, it's a little funny to me too because obviously we just went down this road with Queen Charlotte in season 2, and Queen Charlotte being convinced that Eloise was Lady Whistledown is part of what ultimately led to the downfall of Eloise and Pen's friendship. On the one hand, it feels a little repetitive to have Colin suspect Elle in season 3 when we just went down this road with Queen Charlotte in season 2. On the other hand, it is also kind of an interesting crossroads for Pen to be at. Will she learn from her mistakes with Eloise, or will she make the same ones with Colin. Although I don't think we necessarily need Colin to be suspicious of Elle in order to be asking those questions about whether Pen will make the same mistakes as she did with Eloise with him. I think it's enough that, like, we're asking, is she going to tell Colin herself, or is he going to find out by accident like he does in the books? The question of how Colin will find out is obviously a big one and a really interesting one, you know. Will she confess to him on her own? Will she even consider doing that? How much trust will have been repaired in their relationship by the time he does find out? Because I feel like she would only tell him if she felt like she had no other option. And so if things kind of start turning a corner in their relationship and he intends to propose, I cannot imagine that she would say yes without him knowing. And that's really the only way I could imagine her telling him herself. And he'd also have to have fully earned her trust back in order for her to tell him. So, you know, if Colin finds out by accident or if he puts the pieces together on his own, I mean, that's more drama. That's a bigger betrayal. And it's obviously a missed opportunity on Pen's part to rectify the mistakes that she made in season 2 with Eloise. So I could see that being how he finds out. I would prefer that Pen learns from her mistakes and she tells him herself. I would prefer that, like, moment of growth for her. Colin keeps asking when the food's coming, and I get it. He's a hungry boy, okay? I love that for him. But it really bumps the read for me how often we talk about Colin's appetite in this book. Like, he really starts to feel like a cartoon character to me. I feel like I'm being hit over the head with the fact that he has an uncommonly large appetite. I get it, okay? Can he maybe have a little bit more to his personality other than I'm searching for my purpose and I'm hungry? So Colin's spiraling then devolves into, it might not even matter if Eloise isn't Lady Whistledown. If I suspect her, somebody else might suspect her. And she could be ruined just by the rumor of it, which is funny considering what happened in season 2. He decides to demonstrate his point by putting forth a fictional scenario. Suppose I told everyone that I had seduced you. Because you want to seduce her, Colin? He continues, you would be ruined forever. It wouldn't matter that we had never even kissed. That, my dear Penelope, is the power of the word. I think you want to kiss Penelope, Colin. Oh wait, he does get there on his own. Oh, good job, Colin. Good God in heaven, he wanted to kiss Penelope Featherington. It's almost as if I've read this book before. This kind of stops the conversation in its tracks. There's some tension happening, and it all culminates in Penelope asking Colin if he would kiss her. I wonder what happens in chapter 9. So we pick up right where we left off, and Pen kind of chickens out. She's like, never mind, forget I said anything. And Colin's like, thank goodness. I don't have to examine these feelings that I'm not ready to delve into. But then Pen changes her mind. She says, no, I'm not going to forget it. I've spent my entire life forgetting things, not saying them, never telling anyone what I really want. So on the one hand, I love this moment of agency for Pen, especially in the books. I've mentioned before that I think she can come across as a more passive character in the books than she does in the show. And this is obviously a big turning point on so many levels. However, this is where I want Chaos Colin activated after the hand cut scene. I want him to offer a lesson on kissing, okay? Listen, I'm just clowning here, okay? I know it's so early for them to have their first kiss in episode 2, but Luke planted the seed in my head because he was like, I can't imagine watching ep 2 with my mom, much less later episodes. And I was like, what did you do in episode 2? And so that's how the seed got planted. I know we all think that he fantasizes about Pen, or maybe we know. I can't remember if that's been confirmed or if it's just our strongest theory. But the show's not out yet, so let me clown, okay? I do still love the idea of Pen initiating it, but I just feel like this could be a great way for Chaos Colin to shine. Regardless of who initiates their first kiss in the show, I really want it to be after the hand cut scene, or at least during one of their lessons. I feel like it's begging to be a lesson scene, right? Or is that too obvious? I don't know. Maybe they'll do something totally different and I'll be like, this was even better than I could have ever imagined, but for now, I clown. So they kiss and Colin's whole life is ruined. In a good way, of course. He will never be the same. I haven't been talking as much about the song lyrics that I've been sprinkling throughout the book because there's just too much to talk about without that. and this video is already going to be longer than I wanted it to be, but I do want to talk about the ones that I wrote on these couple of pages. So I wrote, when you hold me, it holds me together, and you kiss me in a way that's going to screw me up forever, from Suburban Legends by Taylor Swift. And then I also wrote, does it feel like everything's just like second best after that meteor strike? Yet another Taylor song, but listen, Question is simultaneously the most baffling song that Taylor Swift has ever written, and also the most pollen-coated song that Taylor Swift has ever written. Forget about that chorus, none of us knows what that means, but the verses and that bridge, some people might not get it, but the real ones do, and I do. Okay, so we have to talk about the part of the chapter that is the most important part to me. He pulled back just a few inches so that he could touch her chin and tilt her face up towards his. I'm gonna cry, I love a chin tilt, and we have a chin tilt still, y'all, and just like know that when we all watch this moment on our screens on May 16th, I am not okay. So Colin's like, you know you can kiss me back, and she's like, what do I do? And he's like, whatever you want to do. And she thanks him, and this stops Colin cold in his tracks. This simple phrase causes him to majorly spiral, and it is hilarious to me. It's so perfect. He's like, don't thank me. And she's like, Colin, don't be angry with yourself. I practically forced you to kiss me. He's like, you didn't force me. And poor Pen, she feels so bad that she's upset him, but he's like, fuck, I can't tell her I enjoyed it, but I don't know what this means yet, but I don't know what to tell her. So he just leaves, and I called him a little bitch 3 times. So Colin is in a really pithy mood after that, and he goes back to number 5. And who does he run into but Eloise? Remember, he thinks she's Lady Whistledown. Eloise asks Colin about his visit with Pen because she heard about it from Hyacinth, who heard about it from Felicity, and Colin's like, something has got to be done about all the gossip in this town. And Eloise is like, I would hardly consider this gossip, not as if you're interested in Pen. So we know from the trailer that Eloise is a little suspicious of this arrangement between Pen and Colin. And she's like, since when do you care about Penelope? And this is one of the things that I come back to about Eloise and Pen's friendship not being an equal give and take. Because Eloise has been in her own head so much these past couple of seasons that she hasn't really noticed the growing friendship between Colin and Pen. Like, it's not new. Book L isn't totally off base here. Until this point, Colin hasn't really shown much interest in Penelope, but she's also seen them like talking more at balls and such, so I feel like she should be catching on here. But we do know that Eloise is very preoccupied with her letters to Sir Philip these days, so Pearl wants to say hi. Hi, my love. She's mad at me because she wants to sit in the beanbag chair. Babe, I film in here. Oh my God. I'm trying to film. All right. Here, how's this? Come on. We have a husky on our lap now. Y'all, she's been staring at me for like 10 minutes. And I'm like, what do you want? She wants to be in the beanbag chair. Pearly, I have nowhere else to film. You can sit in my lap. Come on. Okay, so Pearl's gonna tell y'all what happens next, right? So, Colin, Pearly, my love, I promise you'll fit in my lap. You're a small husky. Oh my God. Pearly's in the beanbag chair now, and she's happy. If I knew where the other one was, I would have just had her get in that one, but I don't. So here we are. She's so cute. Where were we? So the conversation between Colin and Eloise devolves into him accusing her of being Lady Whistledown quite aggressively too. I'm like, dude, this is a bit much. Eloise is rightfully pissed when she denies being Lady Whistledown and he doesn't believe her. And she storms out of her room, and that's how the chapter ends. All right, y'all, we're gonna cut off part 1 there, but part 2 will be posted the same day as part 1 because I want to be done with this project before season 3 comes out. So part 2 will be linked in the description. Comment down below your thoughts and predictions on the story beats that we've talked about thus far, or just leave a green heart for Polin to let me know you've made it this far in the video. I hope y'all enjoyed part 1, and I hope to see y'all in part 2. If not, I'll see y'all when I see ya. Thanks for watching. Bye.